The room at the end of the hall. Ella had just moved into her first apartment. It was old but charming, with creaky wooden floors and large windows that let in the moonlight. The landlord had warned her about the apartment's quirks. The water pipes made noise, and the walls were thin, but the rent was cheap, and she was eager to live alone. There was, however, one peculiar detail: the door at the end of the hall. It was bolted shut with an old rusty lock, and when Ella had asked about it, the landlord shrugged. Just storage. Nothing you need to worry about. The first night, Ella unpacked her boxes and settled in. As she lay in bed, the silence of the building wrapped around her. The faint sound of dripping water came from the bathroom, but otherwise, the night was still. Until it wasn't. She heard a soft tap, tap, tap coming from the hallway. Sitting up in bed, she strained her ears. It was faint but deliberate, as though someone was knocking softly on wood. Her eyes darted to the door at the end of the hall. She laughed nervously. Probably the pipes, she muttered, and went back to bed. The second night, the tapping returned. This time, it was louder. Ella sat up, her heart racing. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. Tiptoeing into the hallway, she approached the locked door. The tapping stopped. She pressed her ear to the wood. For a moment, there was silence. Then she heard a faint, scratching sound, as if fingernails were dragging along the other side of the door. "Hello?" she whispered. The scratching stopped. She held her breath. A faint voice whispered back, so soft she almost thought she imagined it. "Help me." Ella jumped back, her pulse pounding. She stared at the door, her phone's light trembling in her hand. The voice didn't come again. She ran back to her room and locked the door. The third night, Ella couldn't sleep. She kept her eyes glued to the hallway, the locked door barely visible in the dim light. The tapping began at midnight, followed by the scratching. This time, it was more frantic. "Help me," the voice pleaded, louder now. Ella couldn't ignore it any longer. She grabbed a flashlight and a hammer from her toolbox. She approached the door, her hands trembling. "I'm going to help you," she said, her voice shaking. The scratching stopped abruptly. Silence. Ella hesitated, but began hammering at the rusty lock. It took several tries, but the lock eventually broke. She pushed the door open, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The room was empty. Dust motes floated in the air, and the faint smell of mildew lingered. There was nothing but old furniture covered in sheets, and a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. "Hello?" she called out, stepping inside. The door slammed shut behind her. Trapped? Ella spun around, her flashlight flickering. She grabbed the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. Her breath quickened as the air grew colder. The mirror caught her eye. At first, it was just her reflection staring back, wide-eyed and terrified. But then, the reflection moved. "Help me," it whispered. Ella screamed as her reflection grinned, a wide, unnatural smile that stretched too far. The reflection stepped closer to the glass, pressing its hands against the inside of the mirror. "Let me out," it said, its voice echoing in the small room. Ella stumbled backward, dropping her flashlight. Darkness swallowed her. She felt a cold hand on her shoulder and whipped around, but no one was there. The last thing she saw was her own reflection stepping out of the mirror, grinning as it reached for her. The morning after, The landlord knocked on Ella's door, puzzled that she hadn't moved her car. He let himself in and called out. But there was no response. The apartment was empty, except for the room at the end of the hall. The door was bolted shut again, the rusty lock hanging in place. Inside, the mirror stood undisturbed. If you looked closely, though, you might see Ella's terrified face pressed against the glass, silently screaming for help.